this is just it's a really cool group. I love having you guys come down each month, and some people are the same, some people are new, and a lot of familiar faces, which I enjoy. And I'll start today by thanking you all again. Every time I tell you guys this, and I'm not sure that people really understand this, that I am the person who gets the most value out of this, out of anyone. And the only reason why I get any value at all is because you guys come down, and because you guys come and speak. And I'm kind of like a parasite who just floats along with the rest of you, taking all the value. But really, I do enjoy this. I do appreciate you all coming down. So thank you for making this meetup a success. I really enjoy that. So I'll plug myself one more time because while I'm here, I might as well. Most of you know, if not all of you, that I launched a new venture called The Scaffold, and I would love your feedback. I'd love for you guys to go on, tear it apart. I'm doing everything for it right now, and I'm bad at a lot of things, and I'm still doing those things, you know, like writing code and design and stuff, shooting videos, editing videos. These are things that I'm not good at that I'm still doing. So feel free to tear it apart and give me feedback, because for the time being, for the next month or two, it's probably just me, so I need to get better at these things. And with your help, I think I can. So if you have the opportunity to check out The Scaffold and give me some feedback, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you all for coming down. I'll be checking my little tablet here. That's where I took my notes. Thank you guys for coming down. I really appreciate this. Thanks especially to Union Square for graciously hosting us once again. This is actually the second time Union Square hosted the Peopleside meetup. So I think that puts you up there with NYU Poly as the most supportive spaces that we've had. So,
well, it's a short commute for me, so
yeah.
I'm biased.
So thank you. I appreciate that. And thank each of you for coming down. So we're going to be talking with 3 people who broadly hold a community title within VC firms, although each of you have slightly different titles, I believe. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves? What I would love to hear is, who do you work for? What is that firm known for? Right? So do you have a market, a stage, geography, some sort of specialization that you all focus on? And how did you guys get to the role that you're in now? Yeah.
Great.
Brittany, why don't you jump in?
I'll go first. So I work at Union Square Ventures. Thank you guys all for coming out tonight in the cold. I didn't have to leave, so very spoiled. My title here is General Manager of the Union Square Ventures Network. So very mouthful title. But basically what I do is I work on internal portfolio sort of knowledge share. So we have about 50 portfolio companies spread across North America and Europe. Typically Series A stage and later. We also have a growth stage fund where we rate a little bit bigger checks. Our thesis is around marketplace businesses, companies that benefit from 2 sides contributing. So you like Twitter or an Etsy or a Meetup, where people can create new things and then share them with other people. That's kind of the thesis of our investment here.
How'd you get here?
Oh, how'd I get here? I actually just wrote a blog post about this today because we're hiring here at Union Square Ventures, and my role to get here was like very backwards. I was an entrepreneur before. I was working with a number of tech companies. I ran an organization working with military veterans who had tech backgrounds, getting them into tech companies here in New York. And through that, I got to know a lot of the heads of HR, tech companies, and when Union Square Ventures was looking for someone to fill this role, they tapped into their network, and I was referred in through those HR managers who had worked with me through my venture. So it's like a very backwards way to come into the VC side, but it's been a great sort of experience in the past 14 months that I've been here.
All right, I'm Dan Kozikowski. I work at First Mark Capital. So we are also seed and Series A investors. 90% of our investments are seed or Series A. We have about 55 active portfolio companies. 50% are in New York City, about 25% in the Bay Area, 25% other. We focus on a little bit of everything. So I think 40% of our investments are consumer-facing, 60% are enterprise. Some of the names that you might be familiar with would be sort of Pinterest, Aereo, Lumosity, Shopify, Newton, Tapad, Lot 18, Second Market. I could keep going, but we've had the opportunity to work with some fantastic entrepreneurs over the past 5 years. We just closed our third fund in October, and we actually haven't announced it publicly yet, but we grew our community team by one today with Mr. Andrew Ovid, who's sitting over here in the corner. So I think that's sort of the quick background on FirstMark. As far as how I got into the position, I spent 5 years working at a clean tech company based in Boston called Enernoc. It was 60 people when I joined. It was 800 people when I left. Just a totally awesome ride. An IPO 2 years after I was there. Tons of fun. Gave me the bug for sort of the startup world. After my time there was finished, I thought, well, hey, I've got the golden touch. Anything I do will take off like a rocket. I joined an early stage startup right after Enernoc that went nowhere fast. So after about a year of that, I was thinking about what to do next. And I was starting to feel like I was getting a little older. So I thought to myself, what matters to me? And I thought about the things that are important. To me, what I care about is data, technology, and finance. And I literally, this is really nerdy, but I made this Venn diagram. I was trying to figure out what exactly was at the center of the Venn diagram. I was like, hey, venture capital. And then so I started looking around, and there's this weird posting for a director of community job. And I'm not sure that I exactly knew what I was getting into, but it sounded like a lot of fun, and I've been at it for 2 years. And what FirstMark has accomplished over the past 2 years has simply been incredible. And I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that. But can't say I 100% knew what I was getting into, but I stumbled my way into it, and it's worked out fantastically well.
Cool. Hi, I'm Nicola Korzenko. I work at Lear Ventures. I guess my title is Head of Platform, which is funny and weird, but we can talk about that later. And so Lear is a seed stage fund. We're based here in New York City. Started about 4 years ago. We also invest in sort of everything. So we have hardware, software, marketplaces, consumer, enterprise, content, commerce. We sort of look at it all. And so really our strictest criteria is stage. So we get involved when companies are raising like 1 million to 3 million. And we have right now about 150 active portfolio companies. Wow. 65% of which are here in New York, but we're also location agnostic. And yeah. And I also sort of had like a circuitous route to VC. I was working, well actually I started my career as a talent agent. I was going to be R.A. Emanuel or somebody like him, and realized only a few years into that I didn't actually want to be a talent agent. So I ended up working at a startup, and I'd been there for about a year when someone saw a tweet that Lear Ventures was hiring and sent it to me, and it was actually for an analyst role. And so I coincidentally had a friend from college who worked at Lear, and so I was like, what's the deal with this analyst role? I feel like I'm a little old for that, because they really wanted someone who was going to like play beer pong with the next like really cool college, founder. And I was not quite tapped into the college scene anymore at that point. But they were like, actually, we're hiring for this totally new role. To this day, I've never seen a spec, so I don't know whether I'm executing against it. But I think Dan and I both had this experience. We were sort of making it up as we go along, and the first people doing it. But anyway, that's how I ended up at Lear.
Cool, thank you. And I'm not going to go down the line for each of these questions. I think that's really boring when that happens. So you guys can, we didn't plan much of this out, but you guys can just jump on in whenever you'd like and add whatever you'd like. And for you guys in the audience as well, when you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll see you guys as well, hopefully. What I would like to know from you all is I've noticed that VCs are becoming much more outward focused, right? There's a lot more PR, starting with blogs and then outreach, community outreach, doing a lot more with their portfolio companies. Can you talk about that trend? What spawned it? What do you think the best VCs are doing to help the community, both external to their portfolio and internal? It's a big question, but jump on in wherever you'd like.
Sure. I mean, there's one sort of macro trend that's driving a lot of this, in my opinion, and that's that it's cheaper and cheaper to start a company these days. So, you know, you got AWS, you got all these web-based services that can drive customers to your product. You used to have to like buy a bunch of servers and go stick them in a room somewhere, no more. So it's cheaper to start a company. It's cheaper to find out whether your product or your service is going to scale. And there's actually more money flowing into the venture space. So you've got increasing supply of startups, so what ends up happening is that a lot of VCs now are actually competing a lot more for the best companies and to work with the best entrepreneurs. So I think that's kind of the macro trend that's driving it. And then as VCs think about how to compete, everyone's money is as green as everyone else's. So you have to think about what else you can do for entrepreneurs and for portfolio companies to drive value. So that's where you get a lot of these sort of services like offerings. And I think that's kind of the macro trend that's driving it. And then once this thing starts getting a life of its own, and you know, one firm sees another firm doing it, then everyone else kind of piles on. And you see it a lot now with everyone's doing content marketing. I saw a great tweet that was like, content marketing is another great way for all VCs to be different in exactly the same way. So anyway, I think that's kind of my 2 cents.
I also, just piggybacking off of that, and I give the same exact answer, including money, which money is greener, literally the same analogy. But the other part of it is this like long tail, sort of like a marketing strategy, where it can theoretically, if done right, create this virtuous cycle where you, as a VC, provide lots of value to your portfolio companies, and then they, when their friends ask them who they should meet with when they're raising money, they say, well, my VC is great and amazing, so they end up sort of sending deal flow back to the VC who has treated them nicely, and so, you know, theoretically, you know, it can yield even better deal flow down the line. So I think there's like a hope, at least, that if we all do a good enough job, we'll, you know, elevate the reputation in the market, and also like in the near term actually create better leads.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've tried to focus on a lot at USV is just knowledge sharing and the value that that can provide, because when you're sitting at the VC level, you get to sit and look into 50 companies simultaneously, and it's very easy to see like this company is having the exact same problem that this company just had like 2 months ago. So why are we letting our companies continuously kind of like hit that same wall? And we have 5 partners here and 50 companies. So each partner has, you know, 10 boards that they sit on, and that's 10 CEOs they work with. But very rarely do they work with the CFO, the head of HR, the head of community, the head of data. They don't necessarily get to see the problems that those individuals are facing. They see it more at the high level. So a lot of what we've tried to do with the network, and I'm sure you guys have done the same, is try and connect better all of the individuals who work at those companies. And that helps, you know, us as VCs in the long run, because if companies are helping each other, it's less of a bottleneck of saying like, hey, we really need a great immigration lawyer, can you tell me? And getting that same question over and over again. So we could say, look, here are all the lawyers that sit in the portfolio, you should all talk to each other, because you're going to have better questions and better answers for each other than we will. You know, we're great at being VCs, but we're not great at, you know, picking out the right data software for your type of company. So that's been something that we've seen it pay dividends of investing in the knowledge network, because like you said, sort of the long tail of actually people helping one another provides more learning that maybe would never have come out. We would have never known about unless we got those people kind of talking.
There's one more thing, which is like maybe a longer shot, especially for me sitting at the early seed stage, because these things take a long time to develop. But hypothetically, if the company has a lot of help down the line, then they're more likely to succeed and provide returns to the VCs. So
exactly.
If we can do, you know, any little bit that helps set up a company with a really high value customer, or if we can make some of those, like save them time, save them energy, they can focus on the stuff that's important, that is like building really tremendously valuable businesses. So I think there's like very hidden below all of this, there's like some, you know, thing that this is driving towards, which is creating value, but not just for the sake of creating value. Like, you know, all of it sort of helps the companies and helps us.
So we're here talking about the people side. So let's move into some of that. I would love to know, in your experience, I imagine you all work for wonderful VCs who partner really well with their portfolio companies and the CEOs that they work with. For the entrepreneurs and prospective entrepreneurs in the audience and those watching, what do you see as the most effective ways that VCs and their CEOs work with one another? So both the things that a VC can do, an investor can do, to help and to create a productive relationship with an entrepreneur, and what can an entrepreneur do to create a productive relationship with an investor?
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about sort of like this Series A stage and later. Like I said, we have 50 portfolio companies. Typically, we take a board seat when we invest in a company. So as a VC, you have to kind of have the mentality that you're going to be with this company for at least 10 years. It's sort of the industry standard of a fund investing until they exit. Ideally an IPO, but maybe an acquisition or maybe some other sort of creative structure of how to get that return back. So I think the mistake that I see some newly invested in entrepreneurs make is that they don't trust their board and they don't ask for enough help and provide enough transparency. Your investors are going to be with you through the good and bad for a very long time, and things will get hard. Sometimes things will be easy, but those numbers that you have that you're not super proud of, that's a learning opportunity to try and get some help and find some insight versus only trying to show numbers that go up and to the right. Like, your investors have already invested. It's like, it's too late. They can't just like throw you to the curb and say, okay, well, they're not growing as much as we hope they would. Like, they're there to really do work for you. So I think more transparency can actually be helpful, but sometimes that can be very hard because everyone wants their business to be doing well and good and wonderful. So the more honesty you can have, the better.
I would add to that, I think a big piece of what you're describing really happens before an investment is made, because we have 4 different investing partners at our firm, and they have 4 totally different characters, and they're going to work well with different types of people. And as you're getting to know a company and the entrepreneurs, you as an investor are figuring, you're making that calculus. Can I spend the next 10 years in the trenches with this person without driving myself insane? And if the answer to that is yes, and the investor is making the same evaluation that the company is making, because it's not a purely financial decision. So I think to a large extent, a lot of that matchmaking, so to speak, happens before an investment is even made.
So how would you guys choose a VC? Nicola, if you were starting your company tomorrow, going out, aside from saying the wonderful VCs that you work with, obviously, how would you choose an investor to work with?
Yeah, so the airport test can't hurt, you know. Would you sit for 4 to 12 hours with that person? I probably want to fill in any gaps. I mean, this is sort of my strategy in life, but to surround myself with people who know things that I don't know and are better at things than I am. So I'd want someone who had great experience and perspective to draw from that was maybe different than my own. And we're talking about this purely from like a personality perspective, or like not just strategy on fundraising, right?
Any strategy, anything that you would, honestly, if you were starting a company tomorrow, what would you be looking for? As opposed to the check.
Well, also just trust, I guess. So like somebody that you think would stick by you and champion you out in the market, like be always sort of speaking positively about you and be honest with you about where they see your business and give good feedback.
So it sounds like for that, if you didn't have a personal relationship with the investor, that you'd really look into references and figure out who they've worked with before. Yeah,
and you can certainly ask VCs for references from their own portfolio, but I would be surprised if they didn't cherry pick them a little bit. So to the extent that you can back channel and buy, and like if you know anyone who's worked with them, I mean that's certainly the best way to get in touch with VCs anyway, is through someone who knows them. So hopefully you can get a candid background kind of detail.
Yeah. Well, it's, do you have a question?
No, it's not a question. It's actually an add-on to what everybody's saying here. Jen Hyman from Rent the Runway wrote a really great post in November that was in the Wall Street Journal called "An Investor's Passion for Your Brand is Critical," and it's her explanation as to how she chose her investors and pointers for other entrepreneurs as to what they should look at in ventures. So I just wanted to put that out there as something to read, because I remembered reading it from then when you guys were talking.
That's great. Yeah, so just what I was going to add to what Nicola said is that not every investor is right for you. It's people sometimes give the analogy of dating, and it's like just like you wouldn't date like every person that's out there. Like not every sort of investor is right. I see a lot of entrepreneurs seeing the title VC and making the connections, but it may be the wrong stage. They may not. They may only invest in hardware in your software business, or they may only do late stage and you only need a check of like $500,000. And I think there's a lot of time that can be wasted in that process of pursuing investors that are not necessarily the right fit for your business. So the more work you can do to kind of like sit down and like go through the list and say what VCs on AngelList or on TechCrunch, Crunchbase, any of those resources actually invest in my stage company that I'm looking to raise and understand similar businesses like mine. Because, at the Series A level, I've seen a bunch of early stage companies, and even if I love them and want to keep in touch with them, if I take a meeting for an hour with them, and they could have been having that meeting with someone who could actually say yes to them at the end of the day. And that wasn't us. So that's kind of the challenge of balancing going after investors. But I think personality fit and that trust is definitely important too.
So again, I'd love to take your questions, and if you have them, raise your hand, let me know, and I'll ask another one before I go out there, and hopefully you guys will have one when we come up for a breath next time. Board dynamics. I think that's one of the most interesting places to see the relationship and a working relationship between investors and entrepreneurs. And there's so much that goes on in the board dynamics between the investor and the entrepreneur, both pulling in the same direction most of the time and in different directions some of the times. There's a lot of people dynamics happen there. Can you guys talk to some of just some of your experience there, some of the best working relationships you've seen, some of the downfalls in board dynamics?
We actually don't take board seats.
You don't take board seats, so you don't have much of an insight into the board dynamics.
I'm unqualified to opine.
Unqualified? That's okay. Brittany, do you look into board dynamics at all?
Probably a little bit. I think, there's, we've definitely had some sessions on running successful board meetings. I think what I didn't know when I started here was that like a successful board is talking with your investors before the actual board meeting. There should be nothing in the board meeting that comes as a surprise to any of the investors. You should set up time to talk for like an hour with each investor prior to that board meeting, saying like, here's what we're going to go over, here's the metrics, here's the deck, here's what's going to happen. Let them know what you're thinking about, and then by the time you actually get to the board meeting, everyone's already informed, and you can actually have a good discussion versus it being very reactionary or very like, wait, what do you mean you're like missed your sales by X amount? Or what do you mean you've like tripled in size and you need to hire like 100 people? Like there should be no surprises in board meetings, and I think that speaks to sort of having maturity in your board is being able to have those conversations and carving out the time. And I think the other thing that I learned was some CEOs have a closed session during their board meeting where they actually step out for 15 minutes every board meeting, and they say, I'm going to step out, you guys can discuss whatever, and then when I come back in, we can discuss whatever you want to. And that shows so much trust in, one, the maturity of the CEO, as well as the maturity of the board being able to say, we trust this person, they trust us, and we're here to work together. So we're not going to sort of hide anything or feel like one person controls the board and they're trying to lean everyone into one decision or not a good decision. But at the end of the day, I think a good board member supports the entrepreneur no matter what the decision. So that's maybe having a different opinion, but being able to get on board for whatever the CEO and whatever the board decides and moving forward with it. Being strong-armed into any decision is not going to make a successful company at all.
Can you just explain why would a CEO leave the board and then have them talk together? Because Or what's the reason? I don't really know.
Yeah, so Matt Bloomberg has written a fantastic book. He's a CEO of Return Path. It's called Startup CEO, I think. It's his 10-year journey as a first-time CEO, and he goes into great detail on to why he does this. But the basic premise is that if anything is ever going wrong with the CEO and the board wants to talk about them, it's very awkward when they're like, well, we need you to step out of the room to do this. So keeping it as a best practice, as sort of like, look, if there's anything to discuss, you have your 15 minutes. If there's not anything to discuss, then that time can be used for other things. So that's been kind of the mentality, but it's a great way for the CEO to get feedback from his board, just as you would if you were an employee of a company and you ask for 360 reviews. Like you ask people below you, above you, everything to give you feedback. Are you doing a good job? Are there things that you're not doing? Without actually requiring one board member to come forward and say, like, I don't think you're doing this well. You can have sort of the group come to one conclusive decision and then go forward and tell you that. So that's kind of the premise, I guess.
Thanks.
There's a
So you all mentioned that you had worked for startups before you came to your current job. In your previous roles, had you worked with VCs, and what was sort of your biggest surprise or adjustment to going to the other side?
So when I was working at a startup, it was like my second job out of college, so I was in a relatively junior role. And I think I knew the names of our VCs, and that's where it ended. So I had zero relationship with our VCs, and that's actually one huge difference between kind of the world 5 or 10 years ago and the world today. So today, if I were working at Enternoc, well, my clone were working at Enternoc and I was working at FirstMark, I would consider it a failure if that employee didn't know that they were part of a FirstMark company. Because what we strive to do is not just engage our companies at the CEO level or even just the C level. We strive to touch every single member of our community in a meaningful way. So as an example, we do 3 tentpole events every year, including a CEO and founder summit, a CTO summit, and a marketing summit. And our marketing summit is open to not just the CMOs and the VPs of marketing in our network, but every employee of the network. And we bring together the best practitioners in the world. So last year we had Spotify, Sailthrough, SurveyMonkey, HubSpot, just kind of a who's who of online marketing. And the idea was to share stories from those companies and have companies share stories with each other. And that's an opportunity that I, as a young employee in an early stage company, would have been able to participate in. So I think the world's changed a bit. And back in my day, I didn't know who the VCs were. Does that answer your question?
So I ran a startup prior to Incline, which works with military veterans, and we raised venture capital from investors in Chicago. And then we raised additional venture capital. So I've sat on the other side of the table and pitched VCs and sort of put together board decks and sat in board meetings. I was on the board of our company for 2 years before we exited to Groupon last year. So coming from the other side, it was, I learned a ton on this side. I don't know if you have any specific questions about that, but yeah.
Jessica,
Can you give me a specific example where the CEO had a particular vision for a revenue stream or a revenue model, and the VC had a completely different opinion, and they were at odds with one another? And how did your company or your fund resolve that conflict and sort of bring them back into balance, seeing eye to eye? Or if the business decided to pivot and there was a lot of disagreement about what direction it should go.
So I would say, I'm not going to go into specifics, but to me, it's the same way you'd resolve any dispute effectively, and it's actually with data. Okay, what is the quote? There's something about data always beating the hippo, which is the highest paid person's opinion. So if there's a legitimate debate on a revenue model, or whether it's a freemium product, or what the gating factors are for pricing, whatever it is, then generally speaking, the successful solutions I've seen have been to go find out, get the data. Because you can't grab someone by the throat and shake them until they sort of agree with you. So the most successful way to be. So I think it's testing and data.
Well, how would you explain something like WhatsApp? because there was no data for that. Like, no data for him saying, like, I only want people to pay $1 a year, and I don't want them to pay until their second year. I mean, and that was like him completely and totally driving that 100% down the line in a really unique way that no one had before, that was based on his like childhood experience of wanting to connect.
Yeah.
So, like, what do you-
Yeah, I think, so we'll use like WhatsApp as sort of the hypothetical example, because it doesn't necessarily speak to anyone particular, and I don't want any of our companies to think it does. So I think in a scenario like that, companies have to be very transparent about their runway and their burn. And every time they go into a board meeting, that information should be there of like, this is how much time we have, this is what we're doing, this is how we're growing. And when you start looking and your runway numbers are getting much smaller, you only have a few months left to survive without going bankrupt at your current burn, that's when it comes down to the board and the CEO determining, well, are you going to monetize? Are you going to change your revenue model? Are you going to go out and raise more money? And usually well in advance of that, WhatsApp probably went out into the market and said, we're going to raise more money because we have something really big. We think if we start charging, it's going to kill our business. So we want to see if the market would invest more money in our business growing without revenue. And the board can say, okay, great, we think you should be monetizing, but if the market is excited about what you're doing and willing to put more money in, then we're willing to support you on that. And they probably went out to the market, raised maybe another round, and then eventually they got to the point where they went out to the market and they probably were looking for more money, and they got an acquisition offer. That was something they wanted to do.
So it's actually thinking of the VC market as the market in a way. Like, we're testing it, not necessarily, yes, you want to build unique users and all of that particular stuff, and really seeing how if people are so passionate about the idea.
Definitely, yeah, I think
That's
so.
a really good point. I like that.
And I think different investors think differently as well. Some investors have a lot of patience, and they say, okay, if you exit in like 15 years, we're fine with that. Not all investors have that luxury or have that mindset. Some investors are great at encouraging companies to get acquired. And if that's what you want to do with your business, like, great, there are great VCs for that. But there are other VCs that don't want that. They want you to build as much value as possible to get to sort of like the IPO or the big exit that way. And as Nicola mentioned, I think getting references from existing portfolio companies about what how the partner has been to them is really important. And you should be very explicit of saying, I want to talk to a company that didn't exit, that failed, or I want to talk to someone that's had a challenging time, and putting that on the VC to give you both the glowing recommendations as well as the people that had an unsuccessful outcome, because you'll probably learn more from that conversation than you will from the successful one.
Yep.
Have you seen changes in terms of focus or challenges that CEOs are having in terms of getting talent? I mean, New York, especially all of your portfolio companies, nowadays companies all have strong technology components to it, product components to it. Is that a topic of conversation that goes on in terms of helping support your portfolio companies get good talent?
I think we're all smirking.
Engineers, yeah, exactly. If you got any engineers, send them to me.
Yeah, I think we all, every startup probably struggles with that unless they
How do you
are.
support them?
We all do it in different ways. Actually, Dan has pioneered a new program at First Mark that's super interesting. That's towards this end. I have a candidate tracking system that whenever anyone sends me a resume, I put it in the system that makes it available to the portfolio in a way that's like sort of double opt-in. Some folks hire recruiters that their companies can share. I think it's like a problem that will always be a problem that people will try to solve. We work a lot with this wonderful company called the Flatiron School that is actually trying to help increase the talent pool in New York City. So I don't know that there's like an answer, but we're definitely all going about trying to help in some way.
How much do you all think about a couple different things? Culture, when you're looking to source employees, right? I know each of you think about that a lot, right? Do you think about the fit to the particular business that you're sending people to, and also do you guys get involved in in helping understand the dynamics within the business is at earlier stages. Obviously, later stages, it's, you know, you're not going to go in and change Etsy's culture, but earlier stages, you definitely have an opportunity to help form that. How much of those things?
So I guess my simple answer would be never take the attitude of forming a company's culture, because that's the entrepreneurs building the culture that they want to shape in their business. As far as when we look at placing talented companies, culture fit is extremely important. I mean, it's important in any context. And Linda, who's in our audience, actually used to work for a company in the USV network and joined the First Mark network. But we met like 2 years ago, and I pegged her as a Schoology person. I was like, this is like the culture I think would be a perfect fit for her. And is it okay if I share the story?
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Great story. I share it all the time.
Yeah. So introduced, at the time she was doing freelancing, and in the back of my mind I was like,
No, go back.
okay, so when I came from clean tech to tech, I was like, I had no idea what I was doing. I was trying to navigate my way around the scene here, and I took an O-Hours appointment, and one of the first appointments that popped up was at meetup.com with Linda, and I went over there, and I was like, what am I supposed to do during these O-Hours? And she's like, I don't know. This is my first one. This is my first one too. So we started to talk for a half hour, and then didn't talk for 2 years, and then reconnected just completely randomly 2 years later at Bread's, just around the corner here.
A year ago.
Yeah, a year ago. And at the time she was freelancing, and I pegged her as a perfect for Schoology, which is one of the First Mark companies. And I introduced her to Schoology in a freelancing context, and then she ended up taking a full-time job about 6 or 9 months later. So that, to me, was, to answer the question directly, was absolutely culture is important, because that's where talented people are going to find a place that they want to work full-time.
So how do you guys find out about the culture at the companies that you're working with?
So I don't know why I keep referencing the rest. You guys don't mean to speak for you, but Brittany actually is a great person to answer this question, because she spends a lot of time at portfolio companies' headquarters, which is sort of when I first joined LV was my goal was to actually go to the company's office and understand better where they work and what they're about, because I think it's a great indicator of the kind of person they are and the kind of vision they have for the company. But yeah, Brittany, over to you.
Yeah. So Nicola has 150 companies, which to me is like mind blowing, because like I have 50, and that's like, plenty.
I have not
of
been
companies.
to all 150 portfolio companies.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So a lot of it is, I do sort of on-sites, which is sitting down with every company's sort of, heads of whatever. They don't have to be necessarily executives, but like HR, sales, marketing, engineering, legal, admin, whatever, sort of even office managers, like whatever it is. I try and sit with everyone in those companies just to figure out like what are the things that they're thinking about and what challenges are they having, and how can we help put them in touch with people that are similar or have similar answers to these types of questions. We also host a number of events here within this room here that bring together people from the portfolio. So even if I can't make it out to their headquarters, we try and get people here. So we host full-day summits for basically every role you can think of at a startup. So those are individual days where we bring in those experts from our portfolio and allow them to kind of share stories. And just through that, you can definitely see there's differences in cultures of how people operate and how people think. One example I always like to give is like Stack Exchange. Every engineer at Stack Exchange has their own private office, which is a very different culture than, say like an Etsy, where all the engineers sit in a big room together, and it's very collaborative. It's very collaborative at Stack Exchange, but the mentality is very much like online collaboration and quiet for engineers and peace, and you're in control of your own time. So even though you may be a great engineer, that would be your skills would work at either one of those companies, the fit of how you actually want your day-to-day to look is very different for this. Yeah.
Hi. This has been great so far, by the way. I'm really getting a lot out of this. Question. So I've been to some of the events that First Mark hosts, mostly the data stuff, because that's my role. and the Hardwired event. And I'm just kind of curious, like, what is the value in hosting those events for you? Like, are you, it doesn't seem like they're just your portfolio companies. Are you like looking for talent at those events, or you are like, yeah, that's one part of it. And the other part is, who's chasing who? Like, are you guys hoping that certain entrepreneurs are going to show up and then you're going to talk to them, or are they coming, are they chasing you, or are you chasing them? How does that work?
So it's a really good question. So just as background, we run Data Driven NYC, which is a 5,500 member meetup. It's not even fair to call it a meetup. It's a monthly conference because it's got higher quality speakers than most of the commercial conferences you'll see. Tell me if I'm overselling it here.
It's awesome. And Hardwired the same way.
Yes, and Hardwired NYC is hardware, Internet of Things, and wearables focused. That's now 1,500 members and growing fast. Also the biggest hardware meetup on the East Coast. So the reason we do those is, like, the way we think about everything we do on the community front is this giant flywheel. And everything we put wood behind has got to keep that flywheel spinning. And if you think about the things that drive our business and drive the success of our companies, it's meeting the best entrepreneurs in the world. So checks that box because we just get to, hey, we have a huge audience. We'd like to invite you to speak to them. It's placing talent, whether it's engineers, data scientists, hardware hackers. So if you have a huge community of data scientists and hardware hackers in a room and they get exposure to the FirstMark brand, as they're thinking about where they're going to want to go full time, they might have a name in the back of their minds of someone who might be able to help them. It gives us a platform, and this is actually like a tertiary at best, but it gives us a platform to promote our companies. But I think in the past 6 months, we've only had 2 FirstMark companies present at one of these events, so it's not like a main focus at all. But the general idea is that it's a platform that helps all these other initiatives that we're building. So that's the value we get.
Yes.
Define early stage. I feel that is a very relative kind of thing, and it's floating in between people. And I believe that 85% of early stage entrepreneurs, they feel that a VC is a match, and they're far away from where we should approach a VC. So what is your point?
Do you guys have different
early
stage,
So
right?
we're the earliest.
And you're still saying 1 to 3 million is the round.
Right. So when we say early stage, and yes, seed is sort of a moving target. It used to be that seed could be like a $400,000 to $800,000 round, and now I think VCs would often see that closer to an angel round. It's all semantics. We have actually like the amount raising is actually pertinent because a lot of the time VCs have an ownership sort of threshold that they're looking for. So it just sort of like you just back into how much they need, how big a check they need to write in order to own 3 to 8%. But then for us, so the money is one thing. The other thing is every fund has probably in their own minds, and some make it explicit, other sorts of thresholds of metrics. Or for us, we tend not to look at